Hello. Welcome to this session, which we will be talking about migrating apps to the cloud. And we have a question to you that's systematic or random. And my name is Mamoon Herzallah. I'm a principal cloud architect with Accenture's Google Center of Excellence. And I'll be joined with my colleague, Greg Buxkamper, who will be talking to us also through parts of the presentation, an important one as well. So let me spend a minute talk about the session overview and what we're trying to accomplish as part of this session. The first part that we are going to talk about is talk about the business priorities and challenges with migrating apps to the cloud, and talk about what do you need to do when you start this journey of migrating your existing workloads from either on-prem or existing cloud provider to Google. And then, as part of this process, Greg will walk us through Accenture's approach for the cloud migration. So that would be the first part that we spend on this particular presentation. Then I'll take the presentation and talk specifically about what are the tools and the best practices that we do as part of specifically moving these workloads into Google Cloud Platform. And then on the third part, we will spend some time talking about some experiences and sharing some lessons learned from existing client examples that we have helped in migrating to the cloud. So with that in mind, I'll hand it over to my colleague here, and who will walk you through the first part of the presentation.
Hi, good morning. My name is Greg Buxkamper. I'm one of the leaders in Accenture's Journey to Cloud practice, and that's really our vendor-agnostic component. And so you'll hear me talk a lot more about process and methodologies, while Mamoon is going to talk about specific examples and technologies. So when our clients start to talk about moving to cloud, there's this temptation that we see of clients looking to say, there's all kinds of technical problems, technical debt, and issues that I need to resolve before I move. And when I move to cloud, I want to take full advantage of all of the capabilities and features that cloud has to offer. And what we see is that can lead to problems. So as an example, one of my clients, which is a oil and gas conglomerate, basically they looked at their environment and they said, we need to fix all of our Active Directory issues, we need to fix several security issues, and we want to take all of our applications to PaaS, cloudify everything, and about 2.5 years later, they basically have nothing to show for it because they're just stuck. So in that case, greed is not good. When we start to think about planning, we have to look at the ideal situation and the situation in the real world. And in the ideal situation, every application would be fully standalone. The application stack would be fully standalone, so you have an isolated application server, web server, database server, be no interaction. And then even if you peel away the technology, the user communities would be completely separate. There'd be no interaction. You had no interaction or no conflicts with other business priorities or other initiatives. But we all know that's not the case. So the reality of the situation is everything that we all work on is very much intertwined. Right? You have shared database servers, you have shared web farms, you have application teams that are focused on several priorities across different applications, and you have to work around those things. Those are all things that we have to address when we're thinking about migration planning. So if we talk about planning, it's really not a binary situation. It really is a spectrum. And on the far left-hand bookend of that, you really have this concept of just throw stuff on the truck and move it. And that's really, you walk in the door, you grab a few things, or you grab your entire portfolio of applications and servers, and you move it, and then you just see what happens. And what we see, we actually do have some clients that try to do this on their own. And what we see that happens is they don't understand the impacts. They experience major issues during the migration, problems with latency, problems with application and GUI performance, and ultimately their migration loses momentum because they lose the support of the business and the user community. On the other end of the spectrum is really the scientific approach, and it's this concept of must understand everything about the applications and the servers before you move them. And quite frankly, that's just as bad as the concept of throw everything on the truck, because you can really get stuck in that analysis paralysis mode and not want to move until you have perfect information. And so the goal is to find somewhere in between that suits your organization and your migration approach. One of the next things that we need to talk about as we look at migration planning is what are your business drivers for migrating to cloud? When we first started migrating to cloud a few years ago, really the drivers were all around these concepts of cost savings and efficiency. Get things into the cloud where we can size for average utilization. We don't have to size for peak. Start to make use of that as a service capability, turn things off and on as needed. But now, as we look into cloud, there's many more business drivers and values that you can get out of that. The IT agility and the innovation, and ultimately the business growth and business agility. So we're moving beyond IT cost to IT kind of generating revenue to really cloud driving business revenue. And you have to take that into account as you do your planning. One example to think about it, that is a retail client that we had, originally had started to look at cost savings. That was their primary driver, but when they got into it, they realized they could start to take advantage of the analytics and machine learning capabilities and really immediately jump to getting this business growth and business agility. So again, those are some of the factors you need to think about. So you'll hear us talk about the different steps and the different data points that we think you need to collect when you're doing migration planning. And planning really to a lot of people is all about what date are we going to migrate things. And we would argue that you also need to think about how are you going to migrate it, what approach are you going to take. And really don't think about that as one approach for your entire migration. Think about that on a per application basis. So there's really a ladder or a curve here of effort versus benefit. And the first adoption or migration method is really this concept of data center consolidation or basic capabilities. And this would be moving applications and servers primarily to consolidate your data centers, like you'll hear people moving to cloud, just the DR environment. Or you may hear them move content to part of the content delivery network in order to take off some of the capacity out of their existing structure. The next step up in that is to just do IaaS lift and shift migrations. So just take your existing applications with minimal configuration changes and adjustments and move them into cloud as is. And then you continue to ramp up and you get into a little bit of transformation, moving to containers and other technologies like that. Or you can do full-blown transformation and really recode or refactor your application and take full advantage of all of the features and capabilities that cloud has to offer. And like I said, one of the things to think about here is that each application you can really pick and choose here. If you have an application that is not maintained but is heavily used for certain periods of the month, that really makes sense from a lift and shift perspective. You're not going to get a lot of benefit out of refactoring and recoding that application. Whereas on the far other end of the spectrum, if you have an application that's driving a lot of business, there's a lot of data coming going, it's very actively developed, that's going to make a lot of sense to think about a transformation approach and go through the effort and work to transform that application and recode it from scratch, potentially. Okay. So as we start to talk about migration methodology, there's really 4 challenges that we're trying to overcome in the migration when we think about planning. The first is understanding the inventory. A lot of people struggle to understand what are all of the servers they have in their environment, what are all of the applications that they have in their environment. And then that really leads us into the next step, which is, the next challenge, which is understanding the dependencies between those. Which applications use which servers, which ones are divided out into your different environments between your non-production and your production environments. And then probably more importantly for migration and dealing with some of the additional network latency that we take on when we move to cloud is understanding these application-to-application interfaces. So when you move one application, what's the impact going to be to the end-user experience, and is the application still going to be functional? And then on the back end, what's the impact to batch and those kind of things? The third challenge there is around optimizing these repeated efforts. If you're moving more than a few hundred servers, there's a script or a process that you're going to want to follow. And that's one of the reasons we talk about these different migration patterns. And you want to be as efficient in that process as possible and have the same script that you're executing over and over. You don't want every migration to be a snowflake that you have to figure things out every time. And the last piece last challenge that we're trying to address in planning is really understanding your resourcing needs. Every organization that I know of is resource constrained, and you have to figure out how to work through that. And how you do that is one of the ways that you address that is with proper planning and laying out your different move types across your schedule so that you can predict what your resource requirements are going to be. One of the reasons that we like our methodology for planning these migrations is that we really take a business-driven approach to this. So you'll hear of some migrations being very server-centric. They talk in and they'll just pick up some servers and move them. And I would argue that's a recipe for disaster. That's going to cause problems straight away. If you walk in and you begin working with the business and then go downward, top-down, you should see a lot more success when you're doing your planning. So you start by talking with the business, understanding which business units want to migrate, make sure they understand the value of that, and then naturally you should start to see business units that are early adopters, or groups even within business units that are early adopters, and some business units that want to migrate later or last. From there, then you can start to dive into their applications, the different environments, get to your servers and your shared infrastructure. Okay. So this is really the guts of our migration planning process. And there we go. So it starts on the left-hand side, and that's with understanding your application inventory. And I think it's probably well understood that you need to understand what all the applications are in your environment, and you need to, from a technology perspective, but you'll also benefit if you'll start to understand also the business view of the application. When is it used? How is it used? How many users? Components like security. If you do have a little bit of technical debt that you want to address, understanding those kind of components. And then same situation on the infrastructure side. What are all of those servers in your environment? What operating system are they running? What operating system, and that's particularly to, if the OS is not supported in your future state environment, or you want to use the opportunity to upgrade, but collecting that kind of information. From there, then you're starting to build that mapping or those linkages between the servers and the applications. And again, that's both the application to server, which is one part of it, but probably the more important part of that and the more difficult part is that application to application mapping. You have to understand those interfaces so that when you pick them up and move them, you move the same thing. You move the highly coupled applications together at the same time and maintain that end user usability. So then once you map those infrastructure to applications and applications to applications, then you need to go through the process of identifying the move approach. And that's back to determining which of those applications are going to get the value of cloud and to what extent. So if you want to assign the IaaS lift and shift, if you want to do or refactoring or containerization, need to do all of that thinking, or at least an initial pass, during the migration planning phase. Then once you have that mapping and that move approach, then you take that mapping and you use that to create your bundles. Bundles or move groups. And in our methodology, the bundle is really the atomic unit or the smallest unit of applications and servers that can move at the same time. So you know that as you're talking about doing a move, that bundle, that group of servers and applications, all has to move together. And if there's a problem, it'll all move back together. And likewise, when you start to think about waves, to us, a wave is just a date. So a wave is a collection of bundles on a date. So then, once you have that bundle or those atomic units of servers and applications that need to move at the same time to preserve that end user experience, then you can put them on the schedule. And that schedule really starts with a straw man or a framework of what are your possible move dates. And typically we see certain dates fall out because of month-end physical close, freeze periods having to do with either busy times of the year or with holiday seasons. You could also start to see components of the schedule fall out for particular business units or particular application teams because of other campaigns or other initiatives they have going on. But that's where you place those bundles on those move dates. And then once you have that, you have a fairly robust schedule at that point that you can use for resource estimation and those kinds of things. Okay. So how we handle this from an Accenture standpoint is we actually have built, instantiated our methodology into a tool called Accelerate for Cloud. And Accelerate for Cloud really is a workflow tool. When we looked at the tooling environment, so there's a lot of great tools out there to drive these migrations, but they're technical tools, right? They're good tools for taking the servers and the applications and getting them up into the cloud. There's not really a lot of good tools to drive the work behind the migration and drive all the tasks. And so we have this tool called Accelerate for Cloud, and it takes us all the way from that inventory stage where you load in the inventory and then you start to match and map it. It takes us through an application questionnaire process where we load it up with information from a CMDB, other spreadsheets, and any other data sources that are possible, and then that gets passed back to the application owners to validate that information and plug in other things that we need for the migration. And then from there, we can use that to drive the schedule. We use it to check our bundles, so it actually keeps track of all the mappings that we've identified and the interfaces between applications. And then we can use that to validate and make sure that we've accommodated all those interfaces as we're putting the bundles together. And then it turns out a number of reports that allows us to take reports back to the business and say, here's when all of your applications are migrating. Go to individual owners, say, here's the different events that you'll have. Is that good or bad based on your scenario and situation? And then ultimately it drives through to the final migration, which is beyond planning. But it gets us down into 15-minute increments during the actual migration where we can track the migration of hundreds of servers at a time.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you. Can you hear me, guys? Okay, great. All right, so that was an important part of the migration that usually gets forgotten in many small and medium type of companies who may think that just because I can take an image or a server and move it to Google Cloud Platform, that basically means the majority of my job is done. And reality is far, far, far from that. And I'm going to start looking at some of the more details. So Greg gave you the 20,000-foot view. I'm going now down to about a 1,000-foot view, talk about how we can do some of this in GCP and what are the implications and the things that you need to be aware of and what type of some of the adoption patterns that we see as we talk to our customers in the field. So there are customers who would basically still insist on the fact that we still want to do it on our own, right? And for those who are insisting to do it on their own, basically all the things that Greg talked about, whether that's the planning, figuring out the inventory, the mapping, the bundling, the scheduling, all of that, that basically goes back to your lab, right? And if you were to look at these type of activities here, whether it's assessment, planning, or the networking scheduling, or the replication, or whatever additional activities that you need to do, you need to take a deep look within your organization and say, do I have the capability, the skills, the time, and willing to assume the risk if I were to do that on my own, right? So that's key question you need to think about as part of your taking that upon yourself to go and do it from A to Z. So that's just something to point out, because there are still these folks out in the field that they think they can do it from A to Z on their own without looking at it from a holistic type of perspectives and understanding what are the implications of the app migration type of process. Now, if you were to look at where Google can help, I'm sure many of you have looked at the Google Cloud Platform, and that's why you're here, trying to look at, well, what are the tools, the things that would help me as part of the migration process. So if you were to look at this slide, basically it presents different consumption models and the things that are the typical suspects for migrating to the cloud. So when you look at infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and SaaS, different companies will be at different end of the spectrum, and some companies may be at all ends of the spectrum when it comes to these type of consumption models. So from Google's perspective, we have different type of constructs or capabilities that would allow you to say, okay, well, in terms of SaaS, one of the key things that we look at is Google Cloud Storage, and that's one that we want to basically just try to get our data on it, start doing some backups, disaster recovery, and all of these type of things. PaaS perspective, we have lots of constructs that would help you to get there as well in terms of the data that would be required to be migrated with these type of apps. And these are some of the constructs, whether it's Cloud SQL, Data Store, Bigtable, BigQuery, Spanner, it doesn't matter. All of these things are managed for you, and they can be used as part of the migration. And if you're looking to import or export data from SaaS type of applications, you can leverage the services of Dataflow that would allow you to do that. From application perspective, you have different set of options as well. So if you're starting with IaaS, you have compute type of capabilities with GCE, Google Compute Engine type of capabilities. And you have also the ability to leverage containers as part of the process. And then you also have, from PaaS perspective, if you don't want to go and fiddle with that, you can look at it and say, okay, well, I want to have the ability to just not worry about that and leverage things that are already procured for me, and that's where you leverage Google App Engine, and Kubernetes comes somewhere in between the two. And certainly Apigee comes into the picture, because if you want to monetize or provide these type of API interfaces to your applications, that's where Apigee can be part of the process. Now, what are the migrations that we see in the field when it comes to GCP? Let's start with a simple case. The simplest of cases is Google Cloud Storage. So this is basically somebody is trying to do backup disaster recovery, or somebody may have a static website that only contains, in this point, just raw HTML and some JavaScript. That basically what you can do, you can just migrate all your content into Google Cloud Storage. It's global, it's replicated. Content is accessible through URI. You can point a DNS to it. The whole website can be up and running in minutes. So that's something that you can do. If you want to leverage CDNs, you can also look at the ones that Google has partnered with. That makes you even more faster type of access to it and caching at the edge of the network. If you are saying, well, okay, that's too simple for me, I have more complex stuff, and that's where you can start looking at the Google Compute Engine, and we start looking at, well, what type of raw capabilities and power that Google Cloud Platform brings to the table, right? So that's where you start looking at different type of machines that are available to you, whether it's Linux, Windows, and live migration from Google as part of the process, or you can look at it from, I have standard machines that are available to you out of the box. I need something that's completely different because I'm special. You can still go and do that, create the amount of CPUs and RAM for you and the storage that caters to your need rather than using what Google offers out of the box. You can have the ability to create custom images, and you can take snapshots. You can make these snapshots available to other people in different projects. You can also create or deploy a container image as part of VCE. So if you have built your containers, you can deploy them directly on VMs from Google as part of the process. And you have the ability to procure up to 160 cores. I just checked that in the console to see what's the maximum, because that number changes. So you have up to 160 cores, 4 terabytes of RAM, and up to 64 terabytes of storage that are available to you. And on top of all of that, you get all the benefits of Elastic type of capabilities, auto-scale up, auto-scale down, monitoring, all of these things that you get as part of Google Cloud Platform. On the other end of the spectrum, You might come and say, you know what, I don't have the patience to deal with all of this. I want something that's much easier. I just want to go, my developers go, give me a Java environment and they want to start coding. I don't want to fiddle with IaaS and do any of this machine setup or any of that. Great. So that's where Google App Engine comes into the picture as part of the process. You have two flavors of Google App Engine. You have the Flex and Standard. Standard, pretty much the same. They're both fully managed type of environments. They're auto-scaling, they're versioned as part of the process. Flex gives you more capabilities than what Standard offers. Standard offers 4 languages. Flex offers you 4+2, and any type of language environment that you want to add, because you can incorporate those as part of your process. You have the ability to do all of these type of environments are backed up for you using the data store, SQL, or GCS cloud storage that are available out of the box. They auto-scale to 0 for the standard part, so basically you can use it for free. If you build it up and nobody's using it, you don't have to pay for it. For the Flex, it scales down to 1, so somebody would have to pay for that if nobody's using it. And Flex also gives you additional capabilities like root access if you want to, where you don't have that as part of standard. And if you're coming and saying, well, that's great, but I'm a company who is running significant type of workloads that are running on my on-prem, and they're taking significant amount of time to be processed. Can Google help me with that? Of course they can. And that's where we start doing the burst out type of mode in hybrid type of clouds, where you can provide some connectivity between you and Google. There are many options. You can do VPN, direct interconnect, peering. And you can use the Google Cloud Power to get some of this type of workloads moved to the cloud, let them run. When you're done, they scale down, and you don't pay for additional work that you don't have to. And you don't have to procure any of the infrastructure or your on-prem, and you don't have to worry about that, okay, now I procured all this infrastructure, nobody's using it, right? So that's a good option for those type of companies who may be interested in that entry point as part of Google Cloud Platform. So there are many options for you. Look at your potential use cases, what you want to do out of that, and select the right pattern for you, and look at it from a holistic perspective as well. And you can look at it from a tactical perspective if that is the only thing that you want to look at, and continue with that. Now, as we look at GCP migration and type of objectives, right, there are many stations along the way where customers look at it and say, well, okay, my objective from moving to the cloud is really about, I want to have my dev environment or my whole infrastructure on Google Cloud, because I think it's the right platform for me from dev testing and production. That would be one option for customers looking into it. Other customers may come and say, you know what, I will just want to use it for disaster recovery backup. Or others saying, we heard that you have great tools and capabilities around big data and machine learning, and that becomes the primary objective of moving to the cloud. So it really all depends on you, what you want to do with it. But for this particular example that I'm trying to explain here this is a company whose primary objective was to accelerate app delivery and leverage Google Cloud Platform to do that. And what type of capabilities that Google offers to you in this type of realm, right? So I talked about the GCE type of components, and the fact that we have JKE as well in terms of Kubernetes, and the fact that we have these wonderful clusters that Kubernetes can allow you to spin and scale up and scale down automatically. You have also the ability for the container builder. So if you want to build containers on GCP, you have the ability to do that. And if you don't want to use Docker Hub, you have an alternative that is provided to you through the container registry on Google Cloud Platform. You have the ability to leverage App Engine as part of the process, and just announced the Cloud Build is also one of these tools that you can use and look into as part of the arsenal for building or accelerating your app delivery on the cloud. You can also have the ability to import VMs, take snapshots, images, and do anything you want to with that, plus the availability of all these container-optimized operating systems that are available to you out of the box from Google. Other customers who may come look at it and say, okay, well, my destination is really machine learning and AI, because there are many things that would be beneficial to me from my particular use case. And with machine learning and AI, I think one of the key things just to remember and keep in mind is to sort the hype from facts. And the first thing you need to do whether it's Google Cloud Platform or any other type of cloud provider, is to understand what are the real use cases that you're trying to accomplish, right? Lots of companies right now are saying we want to do machine learning AI without fully understanding what does that mean, or without fully selecting the right use cases and having the right data in order to get to machine learning. So once you put that aside, you have the right data, you have the right use cases, you've done your homework. Now, what Google Cloud Platform can help me as part of that, and we have tons of capabilities, but it all starts with the basics, right? The basic is basically getting your data to Google Cloud. And we have lots of tools from Google perspective that allows me to cater to structured, non-structured type of data, allow me to cater to OLTP or OLAP type of loads. So it really depends on you what is the right platform or construct for you to get the data to Google Cloud. Once you make these type of decisions, you start looking at what type of tools that are available to me in terms of, I want to use the Google Transfer Service, or I want to use GSUtil, or I want to use any of these providers that offer the transfer type of capabilities to me as part of the process. So there are many options to you, and in previous session, I talked about these options in detail in data migration to cloud. It's a whole session about that, so we cannot cover all of it. But these are part of the key decisions that you need to make as you start in this particular journey to machine learning. And then you also have the ability to do the cloud native support for Hadoop, and that's in the form of Dataproc. And they just announced the auto-scaling of Dataproc clusters, which is a great thing to do. It's in beta right now, but it soon will be in GA, and that would allow you to automatically scale up, scale down in these type of clusters as you move your Hadoop workloads into Google Cloud Platform. And then we have the best-of-breed analytics and machine learning. TensorFlow is the #1 adopted open source tool for machine learning. It's open sourced by Google, right? So it has been used in Google for a long time. It's the #1 adopted. And we have the pre-built models, the perception APIs, and the AutoML type of capabilities that are available to you. Plus, from exploration and analysis, you have the Data Studio, Data Labs, and Google Analytics 360 that are part of the mix of the tools that you need to look into as you migrate or your destination becomes the machine learning. Now, a question that always comes up, as I move to the cloud, lots of companies or lots of individuals think that re-architecting is one of those sexy things that I have to have when I migrate to the cloud. And the answer is not necessarily true, because there are lots of statistics that show that there is value in lift and shift. So I really don't have to just re-architect my applications to the cloud to gain the benefits of the cloud. There are cases, where it makes a lot of sense to go and re-architect the whole application or portions of the application so that you could leverage these type of things. But I think one of the key things that you need to look at, am I as an organization equipped with the right tools and skills to take on such an endeavor, right? So re-architecting and going into microservices pattern and all of that stuff, and the impact on DevOps, and how you go from regular monolith type of systems into suddenly microservices, and how that impacts the whole organization is not a trivial one. So you need to be really aware of the implications of doing that. And once you cross that barrier, then yes, re-architecting could be a great thing to do for the right use cases, for the right situations. In this type of example that I show here, this happens to be an insurance company. They had a great algorithm for underwriting risk. However, that algorithm was not taking into consideration some of the additional data that's coming from different sources, and they wanted to do something with it. So what to do with that? So they said, OK, there are certain pieces that can be refactored, where we can start looking at that data, incorporate it, and then I can create an API so that other components of the business could leverage that new type of functionality, and re-architecting made sense in this particular example, right? So it really depends on your situation. Now, a question comes up also with the GCP migration tools from Google. What's out of the box for me? If you were to go to a project in Google and you look at import VM, you will be provided with two options, Cloud Endure and Velostrata. May 2018, just about 2 months ago, Google announced that they're acquiring Velostrata, and it would become a Google company in the coming month or so. There were many sessions on Velostrata, but the primary differentiator between the two, Cloud Endure is a block-level type of migration. So if you have an application with 10 terabytes, 100 terabytes, it's a block-level migration. That means the whole thing needs to be migrated, and it cannot be operated until everything gets migrated to the cloud. Velostrata, on the other hand, allows you to split the storage from compute, and it migrates the compute to the cloud, and it allows you to execute on the compute part while it reaches out to the data that's still in the on-prem type of situation, and then silently it migrates the data, streams it into the cloud. And if something goes wrong, you can roll it back and it stays where it is. So it's a pretty neat type of concept as part of the process. On average, it's about 10 minutes for migrating images. There is an example on YouTube where they migrate Sugar CRM in about 11 minutes, and it's pretty impressive. Now, I'll just go back and remind you of what Greg mentioned earlier. Greed is not good, right? Because you can come and say, OK, well, if it's that easy, let's go and start migrating. No, the answer is not that. I'm not trying to say that, yes, it's easy and nice, but all the things that Greg have talked about, the dependencies, the infrastructure, all of that. And here are things that you need to look at as part of your migration. It's like, as you start, where are these VMs going? What is my project structure? Am I creating one project, multiple projects, 10 projects, right? What am I doing about my network and VPC and IP management? Is that happening on its own, or is somebody doing it for me? What are my DevOps practices? How my developers and engineers are going to do when these images are suddenly backing up? And how do I get images? Where do I store them, right? All of these things are important. Identity and access management. Are you creating the groups? What type of groups? What type of roles? Moving from on-prem to a cloud type of model. Are there any things that you need to do? Certainly, yes. And then you have to look at, from security perspective, firewall rules, routes, etc. What's happening there? What ports you need to open? Which applications are talking to which applications? And finally, who is going to manage all of that? Are you going to leverage Stack Driver? In what capacity? What are you going to do with the logs? What type of dashboardings, intelligence that you're going to glean out of that? I'm not trying to make it very hard, but I'm just giving you a dose of reality in terms of, when you migrate, there are many considerations to consider as part of the process, and all the things that Greg have talked about, that's the prep work that needs to happen before you start putting and importing that VM. Certainly, you need to start with a POC, start in baby steps, see how the process works, get some comfort level as part of the process, and then you can look at much grander type of journey into migrating process down the road. So with that, I'll hand it back over to my colleague, Greg, and who will walk you through example. Then I'll finish the last two examples. Thank you.
Thank you. So as we look at some of these client examples, we talked about some of the questions you'd ask, and I think the technical questions are all pretty apparent to us. But we would also recommend you think about a different line of questioning around some business questions and really some project management type questions. And I think you'll see how these kind of played out in the client examples that we're going to go through. But first and foremost, to kind of shape your migration plan and how you approach planning, should talk to the IT and business on what are the primary reasons for moving to cloud. Is it just cost savings, or are you trying to get some of that additional agility and innovation and business growth out of that? And what are the expected outcomes? Again, those questions are going to drive some overall themes and help you understand if your plan is going to accomplish those. And then from a project management perspective, you really want to think about how fast are you wanting to move to cloud? What does that mean from a pace? So if you want to be done in 6 months and you have 2,000 servers, can you actually do that many servers every month? Do you have the capacity to do that, or do you need to look at changing some factor there? What's the budget? That'll tell you, if your plan comes back and tells you that it's all refactoring and it's going to take you thousands of hours per application, you probably don't have the right plan. And then the last couple there are just going to tie into those. So the first client example here it's a leading marketer and distributor of beverages, and this is an organization that had about 1,000 servers. It was a mix of Windows as well as some proprietary AIX and an I series that drove a significant part of the business process. And from a business perspective, they were looking to get away from their heavy assets, and they were looking to offload everything from their data center to bottling plants and really shut down some capability within this one particular business unit. And so how that played out into their migration plan is it ended up being basically a lift and shift migration of about 500 servers, just a regular IaaS migration. But then they looked at those proprietary platforms, and for the AIX, they did the business case, and they said that's worth transforming. So they didn't have to pay AIX and some of the middleware service charges going forward. And so they moved about 100, 150 servers that way. And then they looked at the I-Series, and we looked at a couple of different things to do with that. And ultimately, they said it's too important, and we don't want to invest a lot of money in this. And so they kept that separate and in a colo. And then, as you would expect, and anytime you're going through a large transformation, there are about 200 servers that just fell off because of decommissioning, not being used anymore. So while overall it was a success and we did a significant amount of planning, there were some lessons to be learned here. And this is the initial migration plan and then the actual migration plan as it went through evolutions. And so you can see that red dashed line on the left-hand side. That was the original migration plan. And then in parallel, the company was executing an SAP move to cloud as well. And ran into some problems there. That sucked up resources that we needed to use for the non-SAP migration. And so that shifted out. Now, the interesting thing here is while we did have to replan, because we had collected all of the constraint information and some of the other business and project management information when we did the plan, we were able to replan in the course of just a few days, take that back to the business and application teams, say, does this work for you? They signed off, and then we started to execute again. And then you'll see that then we had to replan one more time. The other thing that was going on is they were shifting their network management to another provider. And that ended up causing some problems with the network delays and connections and those kind of things. And again, we had to go back to the drawing board, but we were able to do that very quickly because we already had all the data collected, and we were able to lay that out again. So one of our arguments here is certainly you need to do pretty good planning, but at a certain point you won't have control over some of the parallel initiatives, and you're going to get influenced. But if your planning data is good, if you collected the right information, you can adjust and pivot to that very quickly.
Thank you. Okay, so let's walk through our second example, and that's a financial and healthcare services company. And that company, basically, they wanted to migrate certain number of applications for a conference, and they wanted to do it fast. So it's right from the get-go, do this quickly, right? And the assumption is, we have done the homework around which applications we want to migrate, because these are the ones that we needed, and the candidates were provided to us. As part of this process, you need to look at it and say, okay, well, are these the right applications before you start the migration process? Because yes, the customer may come and tell you, these are the applications that I want to migrate. One of the key things that you need to ask, what are the dependencies? Are these applications standalone? Can they function on their own? Or are there other dependencies that you can? So if I go and flip the switch from A to Z, and then these applications, once they go to the cloud, is that okay, or there are other things that I need to worry about? Turned out that one of these applications was not the right application to migrate because there were lots of dependencies that they were not aware of, right? So even though that the customer is the one who recommended what type of application to migrate, they were not aware of 100% of these type of dependencies, and that's very common. It's not every company that know everything. There are lots of people who know or write this application without even documentations and doing something that you may not be aware of. So just pay attention to that as part of the process. So what we did, we ended up doing, we designed the right secure architecture for them in Google Cloud Platform. We did our due diligence when it comes to these type of applications, and we selected the right metaphors from Google to migrate them, and the applications were migrated, and the project was a success. From key lessons learned perspective is trying to understand what type of workloads in general. So I'm going to talk in general here about workload prioritization. So some companies may come and tell you, well, what is the criteria for workload prioritization? Some companies may approach it from the fact that, from TPS per second, transactions per second. So the more TPS per second, most likely that application is more of a mission critical, right? And that becomes a less likelihood candidate that you need to migrate first. So that's one of those things that you probably want to put towards the middle or the bottom of the list, because depending on the mission criticality, if something goes wrong, business may be disrupted. So you may want to start with the ones that are more simple, right? The ones that has less interfaces, the ones that may not impact the business in a significant manner. Analytical workloads are typically one of these workloads that you can prioritize to the cloud, because what you can do with that, you can learn a lot from from moving these type of applications to the cloud and seeing what type of lessons learned and what type of skills you have in place so that you can adjust for the next mission critical type of migrations as part of the process. The other lessons learned is skills. I think, if you are in the job market and looking for somebody who knows Google Cloud Platform very well, you don't find many of these people in the marketplace, right? That is something that a lot of companies that we know of are struggling. And that is something that you need to pay attention to as you put your scheduling plan and who is the right partner that you need to work with as part of the migration process. The next example that I'll talk about is a large global bank. Basically, that bank operates in North America and has a global presence. The problem statement was they wanted to migrate a risk application that was taking about 5 hours to process, but significant amount of cost that's being spent on the horsepower that is required to go and figure out all this type of risk and all of these calculations that needed to happen. So as part of the process, we looked at the application, we looked at the existing components. There were some, we had all the time to do that, so I'll emphasize that, because there were elements of re-architecture or re-architecting some components of the application. So we had all the time that we needed to look at it, investigate, and figure out, okay, here are certain components of refactoring that would be required. Looking at the cost that's being generated or created, we looked at a construct in Google Cloud Platform that's called preemptible VMs. Anybody heard about preemptible VMs? Okay, very few. Preemptible VMs are among those key wonderful things in Google Cloud where if your application is not mission critical, you basically procure a VM and you say, I want that to be preemptible. What does that mean? Google would schedule that for you, it would run, but if Google needs that capacity for that VM, on a 1-minute notice, they'll take it away, they'll park everything, and then when they're done with that, they'll restart it and it will resume. Right? What do you get in return for that? About 80% discount on the cost of the VM. So that's pretty significant. So if you have these workloads that do not need to be on all the time and you can leverage preemptible VMs, sure, all power to you. This client saved significant amount of cost. 70% of the cost was saved by reusing preemptible VMs. And we also were able to re-architect some of these applications and use the microservice pattern as part of the process. But one of the key lessons learned for the customer here is they did not have enough people with the right skills in DevOps. And that's where the partner came in and kind of provided our own methodology when it comes to how you could use these type of patterns within your organization, what type of assessment that would be needed, what type of gaps, and what type of recommendations to fill these gaps were provided. And pretty much it turned out to be a very successful story at the end of the day. So the last thing that the question we asked at the beginning of the session, anybody still thinks that it's a random job? Okay, good. No hands shown. I'll just leave you with this. This is just one comment from a dimensional research why our application migration projects are late and over budget. Basically, the statistics and the survey that they have done, they found that, yes, there is value in moving to the cloud. Lots of companies who moved the cloud were able to achieve the benefit of the cloud. But the key statement that they found that initial projects were more difficult than expected, taking a year or more. Some of them are failing. 75% of these projects that took longer. 50% of the participants revealed that they are over budget. So the key things that were basically uncovered as a reason for that: lack of expertise, security concerns, resource shortages, and competing priorities were listed as the primary ones. So it goes back to our story. Don't do overgreed, and if you don't have the right skills, leverage a partner as part of the migration, and hopefully it will be a successful one. Thank you.